it was quite a change going from being ignored to suddenly being in demand, but it felt wonderful, and I wasn't bitter. In fact, I was thrilled. Because I knew this wasn't about saying I showed you, it was about saying I showed me. And I had. I eventually partnered with Scott Miller, Vice President of Trident Media Group in New York, as my agent, and at that point we had a lot of options. But I ended up signing a dual publishing deal with Thomas & Mercer and 47 North. I decided I wanted to stay with Amazon because they stayed with me when nobody else would. And I believed in them because they believed in me. And I've learned some really valuable lessons from all this. Because for me, I find that getting through the hard parts in life is about finding the lessons. And there is always one or two or three. And you don't get to see those until you get to the other side. That's the payoff, I guess. And the lesson in this was opinions vary. You can use them to shape you, but you cannot let them define you. And they cannot break you unless you let them. I never let them. Failure is often a prerequisite for success. And once you understand that, you're far ahead of the game, because I don't think most people see that while it's happening. Everyone goes there. And sometimes you actually have to go there to get here. Finally, the very moment when you feel like you've had enough and you want to give up is the very moment you should not. Because quite often, that's the moment right before amazing things start to happen. And I lived it. So that's my story. Since all this has happened, without a doubt, I get a lot of questions. And I want to try to answer one of them. The most common ones that authors ask me, and those are, how did you do it? And how can I do it? I don't know how to answer that question. Because it's almost as if they might expect me to come up with some magic formula or a secret key I found to getting people to buy my books. But the truth is, there really is none that exists. I can tell you that a number of times I backtracked and tried to figure out what happened, how I got here, and most of all, how I beat what seemed like insurmountable odds at the time. And each time I did, I seemed to come back to a few really key points, and I'm going to share those with you. I have to warn you, though, they're not going to be earth-shaking. Well, they may not be earth-shaking in the point of selling books, but they are, I believe these are the magic keys. You only get one shot at making a first impression. Write the best book you can. You don't go on a date without taking a shower and washing your hair. At least I hope you don't. So why would you send out a book into the world that isn't the absolute best you can make it? The advice I give people when they ask me is, please do not make the same mistake countless others have made in this era of self-publishing. Do not shoot yourself in the foot before you ever make it out of the gate by releasing your work before it's ready. Because it's the fastest route to failure, I know. Get input on your books as much as you can. As writers, we all work in a vacuum during the creative process, and that's okay. But you can't stay there forever, although a lot of times you want to. I know I do. Ask the people you trust to read your work. You've probably heard this a few times over the weekend, and you probably going to hear it again, but I can't stress it enough because it's that important. Please hire a competent editor to look over your manuscript. No matter how good of a writer you are, no matter how long you've been doing this, you'll always need an experienced and objective eye to bring your book to the next level. And you just can't do it yourself. You're too close to your work, and and lost a large degree of objectivity. You can't see your overuse of certain words because they're not conscious choices. You can't spot your typos after a certain point because they become invisible. It really is the key, and it was my key because I did not put this book out until I was ready, and it took me a while to get it ready, and it was really important to me to put it out because I think when you send a book out to the readers, they deserve the best you can do, and I think the readers paid me back in that way by buying my book, by talking about my book. You know, it really made a big difference for me. Here are a few more ideas. Don't chase trends or try to figure out what will sell. Because by the time you actually finish writing your book, those parameters will be long gone. They change that quickly. My first book was a paranormal thriller, and I had no idea what the trend at that time paranormal was. This was when paranormal first started. I didn't know that was the big thing. I fell into that. I just wrote what I wanted to write. And I honestly hadn't read very many paranormal thrillers. I think I've read a horror novel in a long time. It actually became a horror bestseller. I hadn't read a lot of horror. And I used to say to myself, God, it's really weird. I wrote this book on horror, and here this book's doing so well. Should I tell anybody I haven't read a horror book? You know. And I said to my friend, I said, isn't that weird? And she said, no. She said, actually, it's not weird. Maybe it's because you didn't read those books that your book was so good. Maybe you didn't have anything to compare it to, so you just compared it to what was in your heart. And really, that's what happened. I just wanted to write this story, and I didn't even pay attention to what was happening around me. And I happened to fall into that whole paranormal thing by accident. I really wasn't chasing the trend. So anyway, here are some things that will never go out of style and what will win readers over every single time. Things that no marketing strategy can ever touch. Telling your story the way you want to tell it. Trusting your instincts because they are always right. Trusting your heart because if you feel it, so will your readers. And finally, following your passion and letting it guide you. Because if you do, the rest will be taken care of. That is a guarantee. Let me tell you a little story about passion. Right before I put my book out on Kindle, I was at a writers' conference up in the Bay Area. And they were talking about selling lots and lots of books. That's all they were talking about at a particular conference speech that I was listening to. And the speaker was going on and on about it. And I kept thinking to myself, there's something missing here. There's a disconnect. Something's not making sense. They're not talking about what's important here. He's forgetting about why we write. We write because we love to write. Because for many of us, we have to write. So when the speaker opened the discussion to the audience, I raised my hand. And when he called on me, I said, but don't you think that if you follow your passion, everything else will just fall into place? Well, he looked at me funny. And for a long time, he didn't say anything. Finally, he said, are you bullshitting me? I said, no, as I kind of shrunk into my seat. Why? He rolled his eyes and called on the next person. But regardless of that less enthusiastic response, I still hold very firm to that belief. In fact, I believe it now more than ever. And I've used it to guide me through every decision I've made where my books are concerned. I write about what inspires me. And even when logic or the rules tell me otherwise, I allow my passion for writing to lead the way. And I trust I trust that. So far, it has not failed me. When you do what you love and you keep doing it on a consistent basis, success is bound to happen. It just feels like one of those truths of life. That's what I did. And when some people ask me how I did it, I just say I followed my heart. I followed my passion. I didn't listen to other people. Every step of the way was me following my heart. When people said no and it's not going to work, it's not going to sell, I believed it in my heart that it would, and I followed that. And that's what kept me fighting. In the hospitals, in everything. When my mother passed away, everything. I just kept saying to myself, I believe this. It was organic for me to do that. Another key is what I call trusting the process. It's not an easy thing to do because the process isn't always so easy to endure. Writing a novel is a journey, not a destination. It took me a long time to finally realize that. Sometimes it's bumpy, sometimes it's invigorating, and yes, sometimes it's just a big old pain in the ass. But it's all part of the process, and it's all necessary. There is a purpose for everything. And I've learned that if I just allow everything to occur, good or bad, I'll be just fine. I've also learned that the more I resist the process, the more I tend to get in my own way. So I do my best to avoid that pitfall. I allow my process to work for me instead of against me. Your rejections, your writer's block, your fear of failure, the bad reviews, and trust me, everybody gets them, no matter how good your book is. Even your own harsh criticism of yourself, these are all part of your process. And in the final count are actually necessary in order to help you move forward. So the most important thing that I do is try to figure out what are the parts of my process, and then I accept them. I use them to mobilize instead of paralyze. Here are some examples. One of my biggest fears that has not diminished one bit, regardless of sales, regardless of everything else, is that my readers won't enjoy my next book as much as my last, or that they won't enjoy it all. I have been obsessed about this from the beginning, even with my first book. My readers are so important to me, and I feel I owe them so much, and they owe me nothing. Really, when I think about it, I just feel I have an obligation to them to give them something better every time, because I always have a hard time getting my mind around the concept of someone buying my book. And especially for those of you who put a book out for the first time and have your first sales, it is a little mind-blowing when someone buys your book, you know? And then when a lot of people buy your book, it's even more mind-blowing. And I feel even more humbled by it, and more grateful, and feel more like I owe them something better. And I don't want to let them down. So that's kind of what drives me. But I've kind of changed the strategy with that. It used to drive me crazy. It used to get in my way. It used to block me from doing all kinds of things. Now, I've changed it a little bit. It's what pushes me, it keeps me from being lazy, from settling for good enough. And it pushes me to stretch my work as far as I can. Even when I'm exhausted and feel like I can't, I do. Same thing with writer's block. Instead of getting all freaked out about it, I've learned to recognize it's a signpost. I'm either overthinking, overtired, overstressed, or somewhere along the way I've taken the wrong turn. And I need to figure out how to get back on the road. Finally, my last piece of advice. If your idea of success happens to be selling a lot of books, and if and when you finally see that happen, I'd like you to keep one thing in mind. Try not to forget why you write. Trust me when I say how easy it is to get caught up in commercial success. Whether you have it or you don't. It can be like a drug. And the more of it you get, the more of it you want. And when that happens, it's easy to forget why you do this in the first place. For me, it's always been about the journey I take each time I open up a blank page and look at Look at the blank page. Watching my imaginary world slowly take shape and my characters come to life. That's when the magic begins for me. And there is nothing better. I don't care how many books I sell. But the moment I forget that, that's the reason I write, that's the exact moment the magic begins to fade. So I try to remind myself on a regular basis why I write. And I try, and that the, I try to remind myself on a regular basis that the sales and the readers may not always be there. Because in reality, it's a possibility, right? No matter how many books you've sold. I hope that never happens. But if by some chance, someday, they're no longer around, I know I will always have the magic, and nobody can take that away from me. And that magic was what started me on this journey. It's what kept me going, even through all the obstacles I spoke of earlier that got in my way. So as you go off on your own journey, if you face rejection or people who try to tell you you'll never make it, don't believe them. Because you already have the magic. You have the passion for the written word. And because of that, you'll always be happy. And you'll always be successful.